Hello, learners. I welcome you to the fifth lecture of week 4 in the course Environmental Politics, Theories, Concepts, and Debates. In this week, we are discussing environmental movements in India. Today, we will discuss Narmada Bachao Andolan or Save Narmada movement, which started in 1980s and continued in 1990s. It was a movement against the Sardar Sarovar project. And you see, this movement is very special in so many ways in terms of issues and actors. It involved multiple issues and multiple actors. Two major issues raised by movement were green issue and red issue. Red issue means it raised the issue of environmental justice and social justice. And green issue means that it talked about the ecological impact of the project. Now, if we talk about the actors who were involved, so on the one hand, there were parts like state, industry, and on the other hand, local people, marginalized section of the population. And along with that, World Bank, which funded the project. In terms of its spread also, we can say that it was one of the largest movement. Why? Because it covered three states: Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Madhya Pradesh. If we compare it with our previous discussion, the movement which we discussed in the previous lectures, like if we talk about Silent Valley movement, so it was confined to Malabar region, Kerala. If we talk about Chipko movement, so it was largely confined to Uttarakhand. And when we talk about Apiko movement, it was also largely confined to Karnataka. But this movement covered three states. That is the reason it became one of the very important movement to understand different dynamics. So today we'll discuss different aspects of the Narmada Bachao Andolan. This is the outline of today's lecture. We are going to cover these aspects in today's lecture. So we will, begin with a brief introduction of the movement. So as I said in the beginning, that it started in 1980s as a protest against the building of dams on the Narmada River, which was a major waterway flowing across the Indian states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. This movement was led by Medha Patkar and carried by the poor indigenous people who had to be displaced due to construction of the dam. So we can say that this is a movement which was launched by ecosystem people. Now, if we compare this movement with Chipko movement, which held 1 decade back, the difference was that basically the focus of Chipko movement was to preserve local people's access to forest resources. Now, Narmada Bachao Andolan insisted that those people whose rights to local resources cannot be protected due to development. So at least they deserve due compensation. And there must be a proper plan for their resettlement. So initially, these were the major issues raised by NBA. And the specific target of the NBA's protest was the Sardar Sarovar project, the second largest of 30 massive dams that were part of a larger plan for 3,000 dams in India. Now, you see, those who planned the project, they saw it as a lifeline of Gujarat. So we'll try to do what? We'll firstly try to understand the perspective of the planners, what benefits they saw in this project, and then the objections raised by the activist. So two major benefits according to planners of the project were: first, water security and irrigation. So their argument was that dams like SSD would enhance water security and provide irrigation facility to millions of farmers in Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. So it is going to solve the problem of water shortage. Now, second, it is going to contribute to generation of hydroelectric power, which is a renewable and pollution free source of energy. So this way dam would also serve in reducing reliance on fossil fuels. So dam in this way can, according to planners, would be able to resolve two issues: water shortage problem as well as provide energy security. So this was the perspective of the planners. Now we'll see the issues raised by activists. The first very important issue was that the construction of the dam led to the clearing of large forest areas. So many tribal groups who were dependent on these forests for their livelihood. So this is going to deprive them from the sources of their livelihood. Second major objection was with regard to massive displacement. P.P. Karan in his article Environmental Movements in India. Karan writes that the construction of dams and reservoirs will displace an estimated 1 million people and will submerge 350,000 hectares of forest land, 200,000 hectares of agricultural land, and will submerge almost 40,000 hectares of land and 250 villages. So you can imagine the range of displacement. So, this massive displacement, inadequate rehabilitation, and resettlement arrangements led to widespread discontent, especially among the affected groups. Now, as a consequence, a people's organization emerged in each of these three states. These groups finally came together to form the Narmada Bachao Andolan, led by Medha Patkar, and this collective movement started in 1989. One more important issue involved in this movement was that the dam was located in Gujarat, which benefited the most from it, while the flood mainly affected Madhya Pradesh and to a lesser extent Maharashtra. So, this was another very important dimension. According to Basu and Silliman, they argue what? That NBA actually protested on both the ideologies, or it raised two types of ideology. I talked about it in the beginning also. On the one hand, it raised the issue of displacement of the local people, the issue of social justice, the issue of environmental justice. So it fought for them. So that can be called red issue, and green, that is ecological concern. When we were discussing eco socialism, we have discussed this red ideology versus green ideology, and you see this movement is very special. Why? Because it integrated both the red ideology as well as green ideology. Now, on the basis of the above discussion, we may say that the major issues were definition of PAPs, non-addressal of the grievances of the secondary displacement victims, inadequate compensation, and the ecological concerns. In an article written by Padam Nepal, a large list of the issues involved in the NBA has been mentioned. So these were actually the major issue, but Padam Nepal gives a long list of the issue. And what were those issues? That include displacement risk and resettlement provisions, environmental impact and sustainability issues, financial implications of the project, forceful evictions and violation of civil liberties, issues pertaining to river valley planning and management, implications of Western growth model, and alternative development. So, large number of issues were involved in this movement. Now, in the beginning, you see, NBA didn't demand closure of the project. Its only demand was that the anomalies in the rehabilitation and resettlement process must be rectified. But later, it demanded the stoppage of all work on the Narmada Valley Development Project. Since the movement was led by Medha Patkar, who had access to global platform, and at the same time, because World Bank was involved in that, so NBA adopted the method of raising the issue at various global platforms, especially blaming World Bank for funding a project which is anti-people and anti-environment, according to activists. Because of this mounting pressure, the World Bank finally constituted an independent review committee that was known as Morse Commission, which gave its report, the Morse report, in 1992. And this report endorsed all the main concerns raised by the movement. So finally, the World Bank withdrew from the Sardar Sarovar project. You see, it can be called one of the biggest achievement of the movement. And the Narmada Bachao Andolan could halt the building of the Sardar Sarovar Dam from 1994 to 1999. So this can be called a major victory of the or major achievement of the movement. Now we'll talk about the strategies which were adopted in the movement. Mainly, the movement used Gandhian methods like peaceful marches and protest since its beginning. Here, we will discuss the views of one of the major activists, Upa Palit, where she explains the rationale for adopting this strategy in ethical as well as strategic dimension. So she said what? That the main forms of struggle in the valley have been non-violent direct action, marches, satyagrahas, and civil disobedience. The argument which she raised is very, very important. She said that we were fighting for right to life. So in any fight for right to life, how can we resort to violence? The use of violence in a fight for right to life can never be ethically justified. You see, if you can remember, when we were discussing the Earth First movement, I raised this point. When we were critiquing the method of the Earth First movement, especially monkey ranching, when they said we will do everything in defense of Mother Earth and we will use all kind of method for that. That time also we discussed this thing, that when we are fighting for right to life, violence cannot be justified. So this point, you see, has been emphasized by the NBA activist also. So this was the ethical aspect. She also explained that statistically also this method of non-violence can be called more effective. Why it would be called more effective? She says that we were fighting against big powers like state, industry, and our capacity to use physical violence would never be able to match their capacity. So in that way also, use of non-violent method was statistically significant. And the third point which she raises, she says that only non-violent struggle can provide the silence in which the questions we are asking can be heard. So this is the arguments given by Chitrarupa Palit for using non-violent method in the movement. Now coming to leaders and organizations. We all know two major names were there. One was Medha Patkar and another was Baba Amte. Medha Patkar participated in number of hunger strikes and fast, raised this issue on various global platforms. She founded Dharang Rashtra Samiti, which later became Narmada Bachao Andolan. And in 1996, she founded the National Alliance of People's Movement to oppose globalization policies. Baba Amte, you see, he gave a kind of moral leadership to the movement. In fact, his involvement in the movement also gave it a Gandhian face. Why? Because Baba Amte happened to be one of the satyagrahis during the national movement. In terms of organization, there were large number of organizations like Gujarat-based Narmada Asargrast Samiti, Madhya Pradesh-based Narmada Ghati Now Nirman Samiti, and Maharashtra based Narmada Dharang Rashtra Samiti. Mainly these three organizations together formed Narmada Bachao Andolan. So this was the organizational framework of the movement. Now we talk about the impact of the movement. First, its impact on people due to these long fight. Finally, the affected people could get compensation, and the Supreme Court has ordered in 2017 compensation of rupees 60 lakh for each of the nearly 700 families likely to be displaced. So, a three-judge bench headed by Chief Justice J.S. Keher ordered compensation of rupees 60 lakh per family for 2 hectares of land. Second, impact on the World Bank because of the pressure from the activist. Finally, World Bank decided to withdraw from a project which it has funded. So this was another impact. Third very important impact of the movement was that you see it led to a global debate on development discourse, and it played a very important role in bringing the issue of large scale dam projects and their consequences into the global discourse, pushing for better environmental assessments and community participation in development projects. Number of international organizations gained interest in the movement and supported the cause. However, in the year 2000, despite decade-long protest, Supreme Court in a verdict in the case of Narmada Bachao Andolan versus Union of India allowed the completion of the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada River in Gujarat, and the dam was inaugurated in 2017. Thus, on the basis of our above discussion on the Sardar Sarovar project and NBA, we may say that it involved multiple issues and conflicting perspectives, which represented the complex debate of developmental needs of developing societies, environmental concerns, and people's rights. You see, there were different perspectives. One perspective was represented by the NBA activist. Another perspective was represented by the supporter of the project. We have seen that NBA activists protested against the project on the ground that the project has a detrimental impact on poor people and the environment. Their major arguments were first, that the environmental clearance obtained for the project was not based on the complete study of its environmental impact. Second, that the resettlement and rehabilitation policies were not satisfactory. The definition of PAPs, that is, project affected persons, needed revision according to the activist, and that the project deprives the marginalized indigenous communities. On the other hand, when we look at the arguments given by the supporter of the project, what do we find? That according to them, the dam was essential for meeting the developmental needs of the nation. They argued what? That the dam would promote agricultural productivity, it would tackle water shortage, and would enhance economic growth in the region by creating employment, supplying drinking water, irrigation, and hydroelectricity. Their second argument was that the proper measures have been taken for rehabilitation and resettlement. Then the third argument given by them was that the Ministry of Environment and Forest had given clearance to the project after required environmental impact study. They said that there were safeguards to reduce ecological harm, and Narmada Control Authority environmental subgroup ensured adherence to mitigation measures. So these are the two perspectives, one of the activist, another of the supporter of the project. So while understanding this movement, we need to understand both these perspectives. Another very important debate to be understood is the popularity of the movement. Because you see, when we see the popularity of the movement, we may say that there were a number of environmental movement in India in general and anti-dam movements in particular. But in terms of popularity, what do we find? That NBA happened to be one of the most popular anti-dam movement in India. Now, scholars have tried to examine this nature of popularity, especially in terms of international recognition gained by the movement. For example, V. Ratna Reddy sees a kind of connection between the popularity of NBA at the international level and the North South conflict on environmental issues. Reddy argues that the main reason for its international recognition is the point at which the movement has started. Reddy says Narmada Andolan has taken off during the late 1980s when the North South conflict regarding environmental issues had sharpened. So, according to Reddy, because of this timing of the movement when North South conflict, especially on environmental issue, was at peak, somehow that was the fact which was responsible for this popularity of the movement, especially in terms of international recognition. Reddy further argues that the NBA success in gaining external influence does not reflect a healthy trend. Why? Because according to Reddy, the interference of outside agencies in NBA appears to be more political than ecologically. Why? Because their influence, their presence was somehow missing in the case of other major environmental problems like the Bhopal tragedy, which was one of the biggest environmental crises in India involving the issue of environmental justice. But the international organization, international groups, according to Reddy, they did not take so much interest in this case as much they have shown in case of NBA. And therefore, Reddy says that this interference of outside agency was more political than ecological. So you see, therefore, while analyzing NBA, we need to take these diverse perspective into consideration. But you see, it is very important to observe that because of this movement, number of the anomalies which were there in the rehabilitation plan that got removed and the affected person could get compensation. So this can be called a very, very important achievement of the movement. And one very important thing you see, which we need to understand, that this movement somehow led to a very important debate, that is development versus people and environment. Like when we discussed Silent Valley movement, it raised a very important debate, that was development versus environment. Now the debate which was raised by Narmada Bachao Andolan was very comprehensive. It made it very clear that any development project must pay attention to the fact that how it is going to impact the people and how it is going to impact the environment. And therefore we can say that it played very, very important role in strengthening the discourse of sustainable development. Now, these are the references that I have used in my lecture. You may go through it for having a deeper understanding of the movement, and these are the activity questions. So you have to write what was the argument of NBA activists against government's definition of project affected people, what was the role of World Bank in the Sardar Sarovar project, then discuss the major achievements of NBA. Fourth one is critically examine the development versus environment debate in the context of Save Narmada movement. So thank you learners. We discussed various aspects of Narmada Bachao Andolan in this lecture, and it was the last lecture of week 4. So you see, it is the last lecture of mine with you all, because from next week the sessions will be engaged by Dr. Punita Pathak. So in first 4 week, what we have tried to understand, we have tried to understand various theories of environmentalism, various concepts of environmentalism and ideologies. Along with that, we try to understand major global environmental movements as well as Indian environmental movements and its various dynamics. And we also try to understand that how it led to impact policy making, or in other words, what kind of policy changes were introduced by these movements. Now from the next week, you will be understanding about the global initiative for environmental protection, then the environmental governance, especially environmental laws and institutions. So if you have any doubt, any query regarding the discussions which we had in last 4 weeks, you can post your queries in the discussion forum. So thank you so much for joining the lecture.